everybody. I haven't done a proper reading wrap up since October of last year, so I think it's safe to say I am due for a proper reading wrap up. Now maybe you are thinking, whoa, she is going to talk about so many books in this video because she has so many months to catch up on, but unfortunately that is not going to be the case. First of all, because I really have not read that many books in the past couple of months, basically because my reading mood hasn't been the best. Secondly, because I've already decided that I'm not going to talk about any of the books that I read at the end of 2021. I think it's just been too long for that. And if there were any books I've read during that period that are worth talking about, I have talked about them in my best books of 2021 video and my worst books of 2021 video. So there's that. And also I have decided that in this video, when I'm talking about the books that I've read in 2022 so far, I'm not going to talk about all the rereads I've done because I do so many rereads of old favorites and I talk about them every time. I've reviewed them so many times, so I'm not going to do that again because it is just too much. I keep talking about the same books over and over again. I don't really feel like it, so in the end, the amount of books that were left to me to review in this video was a grand total of 5. 5 books that were completely new to me that I've read for the first time in 2022. So I am going to review those books, I'm going to talk about them, and then I consider myself caught up again in the wrap-up game, I guess. I'm not really sure, to be honest, what I'm going to do with wrap-ups in the future because I do like to talk about the books that I've read, but not every single book that I've read, so maybe I'm just going to be a bit more selective with these wrap-ups in the future as well, but that's something for another time. For now, I am going to talk about the 5 books that I've read in 2022 so far that were completely new to me. I will say at the start that, again, my reading mood has not been the best in the past couple of months, which means that I'm not really passionate about either of these books. Like, none of them were my new favorites or the worst books I've ever read. And I think in a large part it is just because of my reading mood and not really because of the quality of the book itself. But it's hard to determine, so keep that in mind when I'm talking about these books. I feel like I'm going to be more negative than I want to be, but that's just a personal thing. You know what, I'm just going to start. I've been rambling long enough now, so it's time to get to the actual books and the actual reviews. The first book that I finished this year is My Contrary Mary by Cynthia Hand, Brody Ashton and Jodie Meadows. If you are familiar on my booktube channel, then those authors might seem familiar to you because they are the authors of My Lady Jane and also the other Lady Janie's books, I guess. Sort of like a book series but with different stories in each book. The thing is that they take a historical figure, or at least like a well-known figure in either history or literature or just, yeah, basically that. They take that story and then they completely rewrite it in a very anachronistic way with lots of references and jokes and funny things. And even though the historical story that it is based on may be very tragic or very sad, the rewritings also are always very funny. My Lady Jane is about Lady Jane Grey, which I've talked about many times on this channel. It's one of my favorite books. It is so funny, so hilarious, so heartwarming, which is why I've read the other Lady Janie's books as well, or at least My Plain Jane, not the other one. Oops. But I also picked up My Contrary Mary, which is basically the same thing, but this book is about Mary, Queen of Scots, who is a very interesting historical figure that is definitely worth having a book written about. So my expectations were quite high because not only is Mary, Queen of Scots very interesting, also this book takes place during the same time as My Lady Jane, or not exactly the same time, but the same historical period. So safe to say, I was very excited for My Contrary Mary. And what it ended up being is, this book was perfectly fine, but it didn't do anything special for me. So again, it's about Mary, Queen of Scots, who was the Queen of Scotland, but also was engaged to the Crown Prince of France, who was also named Francis, which is, you know, perfectly named. She had a very turbulent life. She had multiple marriages in real life. She was eventually executed by Queen Elizabeth I in real life. So of course this book is going to be a little bit different. It follows Mary, it follows Francis, her fiance as well, and then it also follows a completely made up character named Ari, which is short for Aristotle, but it's a girl who is actually the daughter of Nostradamus, who was a sort of like somebody who said he could see the future, who lived at court during that time. I'm getting too deep into the actual bits of history, but yeah, My Contrary Mary, As I said, it is perfectly fine, but I felt like this book was very meh overall. And I think the main reason for that is that I think this book tried too hard to be My Lady Jane. It was trying too hard with the jokes, with the references, with the way it was written, like the writing style. It was trying so hard to recapture that magic of My Lady Jane. So they were trying so hard, and because they were trying so hard, I felt like it kind of missed the mark. It was too much of it. I laughed out loud a couple of times, but not nearly as much as I did with My Lady Jane. I also think that the characters and like their characterization was not fleshed out enough. I think the best one was probably Frances, but Mary herself was just, yeah, I feel like I still don't really know her as a character of this book because there was not much about her. The main thing about her is that one, she is very pretty, and two, she's very contrary. So if you tell her to do something, she will do the opposite just because, you know, she doesn't like being told what to do. Apart from that, I'm not really sure what I think about her as a person. It didn't do much for me, to be honest. Ari, the made-up character, was very funny and interesting, but also she didn't really save the book for me. Overall, this is what I mean with my reading mood. The book was fine, but didn't do much, and yeah, overall it was just a 3-star read. The next book I finished, what else could it be, is a historical fiction, and it is Three Sisters by Heather Morris. You probably know Heather Morris's name again if you are a regular on my channel, because she has also written The Tattooist of Auschwitz and Silka's Journey. Both books I love and admire very much. Both of those books were World War II historical fiction based on real life people and a true story. And the same goes for Three Sisters. This is also based on a true life story, and it's about, funnily enough, three sisters. When they were young, when they were children, they promised their father that they would always look after each other, that they would always care for each other. And then, of course, when they grown into teenagers and young adults, World War II breaks out. They are Jewish, so it is a very unsafe and dangerous time for them. Two of the sisters end up going to Auschwitz very quickly, and one of them ends up being hidden for a very long time. But the main thread to the story is the promise that they would look after each other, and it's basically about their lives during the war. So with this book, as with Heather Morris's other books, it is of course beautiful, heartbreaking, tragic, the things that you will expect with a World War II story that takes place mostly at Auschwitz. So all those things are fine. It was interesting, it was all those things that you would expect. I still think, I always say this, but I still think that it's very important to tell these individual stories because they give such a personal feeling and such an emotional feeling, and it really makes you care for them. It makes you realize what these people went through and how horrible and dangerous these events were. And I think it's very important to remember that and to remember their stories. So all of that is great, amazing, fine, well written. But there's one major criticism that I have towards this book, and that is mostly that it truly feels like it really misses a narrative. It really feels like this book is just a long description of a human life, basically. Which it is, because it is based on a true story and it is a long description of a human life. But when it comes to the narrative and the writing style, I think it really missed kind of a story arc, kind of something that we're working towards, something that makes the book a bit more compelling. Because as of right now, it feels more like a biography, but kind of written in a fictionalized way. And because of that, it took me a very long time to finish this book, because even though I was interested in these people and what happened to them, the way it was written made it kind of boring at the same time. I feel like Heather Morris's other books that I just mentioned also suffer a bit from this, but not as much as Three Sisters. With this book, it felt like an ongoing saga of just description, description, description. And when a book is categorized as historical fiction, I need a bit more from the narrative. I just felt like it could benefit so much from a little bit of editing, a little bit of rewrites, and then it would be perfect. But for now, I will say that this is my least favorite Heather Morris book. It is still very good. I still had a good time reading it, but it just lacks a bit in that department. Next up, a book that had been on my TBR for ages, but I finally finished it, and that is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This book is about a young man named Dorian Gray in the 19th century, yes, who is very beautiful, and then one day he has his picture painted and he gets convinced by this man named, I've already forgotten his name, Sir Henry Wotton. He gets convinced that life will never be as good as it is right now because right now he's young and beautiful. So Dorian Gray makes a wish that instead of himself aging, the portrait will age. And not only will it age, it will show every horrible thing that he has done or that he will do. That of course gives a bit of a supernatural element to it, but then yeah, the story progresses, lots of things happen. I'm not going to say too much, of course, but I will say that I definitely very much enjoyed this book. It is a good one. It is very gothic in that aspect. It is very dark. There are some really dark storylines in it. I completely say what many booktubers and like book reviewers have said, that this is a classic, but it is one of the easiest classics to get through. It isn't like your typical kind of long, slow classic, which is what a lot of people dread. This is much more exciting, much more thrilling in that regard, and that is definitely true. But then on the other hand, I will also say that even though there are many exciting chapters and the characters are exciting and there's so much to it, there are still quite a few chapters that are just long descriptions of lots of things happening that I felt were too long and too boring. So I guess be aware that it's still a classic and that there are chapters like that, because those chapters really put me off a bit actually, because then I was so into the story and then I had to work my way through such a slow chapter that completely got me out of the reading mood that I was in. So yeah, kind of I enjoyed it, but keep that in mind because that also made me take a really long time to finish this book. But I think the moral of the story is very good. I think the characters are so interesting. It's so nice to see a main character who's actually not a great person when it comes to that. And yeah, it is definitely an experience. Hope I see like my bookmark is falling out of it. I promise that I have finished it. I just haven't taken my bookmark out. But yeah, a good one, an interesting one. I'm happy that I can finally cross this one off my TBR list. Next up is My Policeman by Baton Roberts. And this is again historical fiction. It takes place in the 1950s in Brighton in the UK. This book follows three people, namely Marion, Tom and Patrick. Tom is a young policeman who is very handsome, and Marion is a young girl who is in love with Tom. But Patrick is an older man who is also in love with Tom. So it is kind of like this interesting love triangle, which takes place in a time where, of course, having feelings for another man was illegal. So I don't want to say much more about the plot apart from that, because the book has a very interesting way of telling it with different point of views and different points in time as well. So it is kind of, yeah, interesting in that regard, so you should really just experience it for yourself. But what I can say when it comes to reviewing this book is that it's very hard for me to review this book, because to be honest, I don't have any strong opinions on it and I don't have a lot of thoughts about it. I think the story was very well written and I think the characters were interesting and I think it is an important story to tell. I think there's nothing really wrong with it that I can say, but at the same time I don't feel that passionate about it. And again, this might come back to my reading mood, as I talked about before, that I wasn't in the best reading mood and that nothing was really capturing my attention. But with this book, yeah, completely fine. A perfectly fine book. And I think maybe during another time, I would have enjoyed it even more. And now I still enjoyed it, but also it has been a while since I finished it. And I feel like I've forgotten almost everything of it already. So I don't have much to say about it. I'm not the best reviewer when it comes to this book. I think when you hear the premise that it's, hopefully I can still make you excited to read it, because I think this is going to be a very good book for many people. I just somehow wasn't one of those people, even though I cannot give you a single reason why, apart from my reading mood at the time. So that is all I have to say about it, to be honest. But yeah, I have heard that it's going to be a movie at some point, so maybe I'll enjoy that more. And then for the final book that I want to talk about is, that I finished as well, is King of Scars by Leigh Bardugo. I am so excited that I'm finally back into the Grisha-verse and that I'm finally reading, or I finally read another YA fantasy book again, because it had been absolutely ages. This is a sequel series to both Shadow and Bone and the Six of Crows duology, which are two book series in the Grisha-verse, a universe where some people are Grisha, which means that they have basically kind of magical powers, but you shouldn't call it magic because it's actually kind of science. But this series, the King of Scars series, follows different characters from both the Shadow and Bone series and the Six of Crows series. I'm not going to say which characters because that in of itself is already kind of a spoiler. What I loved about this book is that I was so happy to be with some of these characters again. If there's one thing that Leigh Bardugo does so well, it is character work, character writing, because these characters are amazing, they're charismatic, they're interesting, you feel for them, you want to be with them. Like literally, I cannot get enough of these character interactions in Leigh Bardugo Grisha-verse books. So that was amazing. It is also nice to be back in this world again. It's very nice to read some YA fantasy again because it had been too long and I do really love the genre. So many things that I enjoyed about it, but again, a major criticism that I have of this book is that it's too slow. I feel like this book kind of lacked its focus or its drive, like the thing that makes you want to read more and more of it, because for a very long time this book was mostly just setting things up. Basically this entire book is a major setup, and there's so many things that we are building towards, but it isn't until like the final 20% that it actually has some payoff. Which again made me take a very long time to finish this book because I just got bored at times and I was like, okay, my reading span isn't the greatest anyway, so it is going to take me some time. And I feel like I've heard this criticism before and I definitely agree with it because it is slow. It is definitely slow, so be aware of that. I do hope that the second book in this duology is going to be much more action-packed and much more exciting when it comes to that. I've started reading that one right now, but I've only finished like 3 chapters or so not much. But I cannot wait to see what is going to happen with the rest of this story, because yes, there has been a lot of story that has been set up now. I just really want the payoff. I think that it isn't bad, but I think when you have a duology, the first book should not only be a setup, it should also have some story of itself. And this book kind of filled with that. But of course there's a second book, and if the second book is very good and if I enjoy that one very much, then I won't complain about it too much. But for now, yeah, King of Scars. It has some amazing things about it, but it is very slow. And that was it for my first wrap up in about 5 months. I hope you enjoyed it. I feel like I've been rambling about some of these books. I can definitely tell that I'm kind of out of the reviewing game, but I'm getting back into it, so I hope you will enjoy that. And hopefully the next couple of months or like the next couple of weeks will be more reading packed, because I do miss reading a lot and I'm trying my best to get back into the reading mood after all this time. So there are definitely some books that I'm now excited about to read. I made an entire video about it, a spring TBR. You can watch that as well if you want to. But for now I'm just going to end this video because it has already been long enough. So again, I hope you enjoyed it. Leave me a comment, tell me about the best book you have read in the past, I don't know how many months, just that you have read somewhere around this year. I would love to hear about it. I always love to hear other bookish opinions. And then we can have a nice little chat about it and all interact with each other. So yeah, you can also give it a like and subscribe to this channel. It is all optional. You can do it if you want to. As always, I would really appreciate it. And then hopefully I will see you again very soon in my next video. And until then, bye!